Good afternoon, everybody. Good hot summer afternoon here in July, right here in Kutztown Radio. It is the Tyler Werner Show, talking Philadelphia sports. And, in today's case, a little bit of national sports, as we're going to, last week there were some, NFL top QB lists, they're starting to come out, and there's going to be some national talk. And last week here on this show, there was a little bit of overrated, underrated talk as far as each player on each NFL team. Talked about an article last week. Well, briefly talked about it. Mainly Nick Foles, according to this article, being the most overrated player on the Eagles. And we'll talk a little more about this article later, as ran out of time, which happens a lot on this show, talking sports here. But we'll get to more of that article a little later, as well as possibly the NFL QB lists that are coming out, and it's becoming a dead time right now over the summer, the dog days of summer, when it comes to Philadelphia sports, and to some degree, sports in general. Minus maybe the World Cup. Throughout the summer, golf hasn't been that interesting. For those who are into golf, you've had the World Cup that comes around every 4 years. On a more of a world standpoint, I guess you could say, here in the U.S. too, but. Obviously we've continued to talk Phillies early on in the show the past several weeks, and baseball in general. The July 4th weekend, which we obviously we're coming off of, tends to be a big weekend for baseball, and attendances are down in the MLB, and baseball just isn't as big as it is, and And as far as the Phillies are concerned, obviously, things continue to go in a bit of a downward spiral for the Philadelphia Phillies here. Now, general manager Ruben Amaro Jr., coming out in recent days, basically saying, all right, the Phillies, they're this poor, and basically now finally admitting that we got to make some changes. I think, last month when the Phillies had that series where they swept the Braves, perhaps that was maybe the worst, probably the worst possible time that they could have, won 5 straight and, swept the Braves, and, begin to look like they were putting something together, that, the Phillies were coming together, after being at that point being the worst team in the MLB, or at least in the National League, I should say. I don't know about the entire league, but in the National League, and now they're kind of right back there if you take a look at it. But the Phillies at one point were looking like they were putting something together, but essentially, things just kind of continue to crumble for the Phillies, and that little run that they had a little while ago, perhaps conned Ruben Amaro Jr. himself into thinking, this team, maybe they can still compete, they can still put it together, because they're 2-8 in their last 10 games, and they get swept by the Pirates this past weekend. They lose 2 of 3 to the Marlins. Before that, they just they get beaten down by the Braves. Yesterday they get a 3-2 win, the first game in a series with the Brewers. But overall, you look at it, and this Phillies team is done. And again, that little run that they had when they were winning 5 games in a row last month was perhaps counterproductive to the Phillies in the long run, because it conned the organization and thinking, maybe we can hold on to these guys a little, some of these guys a little longer. And now, they come back down to earth when teams are starting to make moves, before the All-Star break. dealing out players, selling players, buying players. And now, the way some of these potential guys that the Phillies could, I guess, quote unquote, sell, they're starting to look like they don't have too much value now. And, that kind of puts the Phillies in a bad spot if as far as selling players goes. Now, Ruben Amaro Jr., as I mentioned, he's admitting changes will need to be made, as the Phillies are now 38-51 with the July 31st trade deadline on the horizon. Well, unfortunately, I mean, I don't know if he realized it or not, but changes need to be made sooner than this. Now, he says it's disappointing, particularly the offense, before last night's game against the Brewers. What more can you say other than we're not swinging the bats very well? I didn't anticipate our guys being this poor, because they are this poor. We think they're better, but they haven't shown it. So at some point we're going to have to make some changes. Some guys, once they're ready to play, may be factors for us. He says he didn't anticipate our guys being this poor. That's where the red flag comes up for me. And, when you're talking about a general manager who's probably done here with the Phillies after this year, talking about making changes, as far as, this organization kind of blowing it up and starting it over again, as, I've been hinting at and many others have been hinting at, the fact that he's only saying now that, we got to make some changes. I just think it's symbolic of the fact that, he's not going to be the guy that's really going to be making these changes in the long term. He's probably going to be zipped after this season, if not, before the end of the season. I don't know, but I think it just goes to show you that it's going to be not only the players need not only need personnel changes on the roster, but in the general manager position, that's probably where it's likely to start as far as major personnel changes. So yeah, I mean, as far as the Phillies goes, I mean, it continues to be a long and counterproductive summer, I guess you could say, for the Philadelphia Phillies organization. And I mean, again, I mean, it was normally July 4th weekend is a big weekend for baseball, and but this case, I mean, attendances are down in the MLB. Interest level is down a little bit in the MLB, certainly as a whole, and so a little bit of talk there of baseball. As far as other Philadelphia sports goes, I mean, we talked a lot of Sixers last week. The Sixers had their draft, and the Flyers also had their draft last week. I didn't really talk about any of the NHL draft. I mean, when it comes to the NHL draft, I mean, it's really a lot of minor league, guys that get drafted by a team, and then they just kind of go to the minor leagues anyways for a while. It's not the NFL, not the NBA, where teams are drafting players and they're ready to play, right then and there. Now, so I mean, I didn't really talk about the NHL draft, and kind of for that reason, those reasons. I mean, it's the NHL draft is, it's typically not up there on the priority list as far as sports talk goes, and especially when the NHL is kind of at the bottom of the big four, I guess you could call them in the first place. But on the other hand, as far as the Flyers are concerned, I mean, next to the Eagles, I mean, the Flyers are the next most competitive team of our four sports. And obviously you have the sputtering Philadelphia Phillies, and the Sixers, who are still in the early stages of a rebuilding process that obviously another tank job of a season, I guess, awaits us. But like I said last week and in recent weeks, for the overall betterment, I guess you could say, of the long-term growth of the 76ers current roster that they have.
I agree.
Long-term thinking here. It's a sacrifice that they're going to have to, they're going to tank another season last year, but I mean, or next year, but I mean, we just kind of went through that last year. Maybe one more tank job, and another high draft pick they get next year. as a result. So that's that. But as far as the Flyers goes, I mean, at least they're the other Philadelphia team that can be competitive. Now, keyword competitive, but not a championship contender. Of course, last month or so they promote Ron Hextall to the general manager position. And initially I was like, well, this is good. I mean, Paul Holmgren. I was actually a little surprised that they decided to make that change. Put Ron Hextall in Paul Holmgren's place. But I'm a little. I mean, I didn't look much into the draft, and again, the NHL draft. Right now, I mean, really, I guess what it comes down to, is what the players do in the minor leagues. Because when you're drafting these players in the NHL draft, I mean, most of the time that's how they go straight to the AHL or whatever, and then you bring them up eventually out of the minor leagues, unless it's a guy like Sidney Crosby, can just bring him right up to the NHL right away, or something like that, as we've seen happen in the past. So I don't really have much to say when it comes to the Flyers NHL draft right now, but so therefore, you look at who they bring up out of the minor leagues. Really, I mean, is what's more telling right now. Now, I mentioned on this show, in the past about the mentality of the Flyers. I mentioned about Zach Rinaldo, how he was the fourth highest penalty minutes leader in the NHL this past season, and I went through that league leaders list, I guess you could say, and talked about how there's like no teams really that are perennial contenders. The Pittsburgh Penguins, the Boston Bruins, the Los Angeles Kings, the Chicago Blackhawks. None of those teams, if I'm not mistaken, had any players on the top 40 list there of highest penalty minute leaders in the league. Now, I mean, the St. Louis Blues were a great team this past season. They didn't go very deep in the playoffs, and they did have a guy on that top. I believe the league leader actually. So I mean, maybe there's a bit of an aberration on that list, but you look through most of the contending teams in the NHL the past several seasons. The teams I just mentioned, and they don't have any of those guys on that list. And I think that again, that's an area where the Flyers could get better. Not getting as many bad penalties or unnecessary penalties, stupid penalties, however you want to put it, and maybe get more skilled players on the roster that are going to contribute, playmakers. More guys for Claude Giroux and Jake Voracek to work with, essentially, on the rest of the roster. And definitely a younger defensive core, maybe would also help. I mean, I guess Kimmo Timonen is, he's turning 40 soon, has decided to come back for perhaps one more year, on that defensive core. And, Mark Streit is, approaching his late 40s, who they got last year. I mean, he's still decent, I guess, but I mean, the defensive core for the Flyers is not getting any younger, really. So last week, again, I talk about Zach Rinaldo and how Ron Hextall, when he was about a month ago, he was right after he was given the job of general manager for the Flyers. He talked with Mike Missinelli, and kind of said how he kind of endorses Claude Giroux, Jake Voracek, this guy, that guy, and then lastly he mentioned Zach Rinaldo. And I'm thinking, I don't think he belongs in that list of guys here that you're endorsing, Ron, but nevertheless, Zach Rinaldo is supposedly a staple of this team. One of the league leaders in penalty minutes. So what did the Flyers do last week? Who do they move up from the AHL to the main roster for the Philadelphia Flyers? Well, they agree to terms with AHL penalty minutes leader of last season, Zach Stortini, to a 1-year, 2-way deal. Who last season? Now I'm not sure. I think that in the AHL they play the same amount of games in the NHL. I should look that up. I mean, I don't know, but nevertheless, last year. Okay, let me look at his stats here. He posted 9 points playing for the team's American Hockey League affiliate of the Anaheim Ducks, the Norfolk Admirals, where he posted 9 points, 4 goals and 5 assists to go along with a league-leading 299 penalty minutes. Now, how many? I got to see how many games that. In his, I guess his career for the Norfolk. Well, okay, Stortini has accumulated 14 goals and 27 assists for 41 points and 725 penalty minutes in 257 NHL games in his career with the Edmonton Oilers and the Nashville Predators. So that he's not a new guy on the block, but he was. Essentially, he was playing in the AHL last season, at least. He was, I guess, to some degree, he was demoted. But in the past, he has played some NHL hockey, and in that NHL hockey, 725 penalty minutes in 257 NHL games. That averages out to about a minor penalty, 1.5. Minor penalties, I guess you could say, per game. I think if you average it out, the math works out to about that. So almost every game, basically every game in the NHL, this guy was guaranteed to get at least a penalty, and half the time maybe 2 penalties in a game. And meanwhile, getting 41 points in 257 NHL games. So. Okay, so maybe 1 in 5 games he would actually get a goal or an assist, if you break the math down. And again, he was basically guaranteed to get you a penalty each game, as well as every 2 games he'd get you 2 penalties essentially. He'd be in the box twice. And the AHL last season, 299 penalty minutes. I would think that they don't. In the AHL, you don't play any more games than you would in a full NHL season, 82. That's almost, based off of last season where he led the AHL in penalty minutes. That works out to be about 2 times every game where he's getting in the box, if you average out the minutes and everything there. That's, again, it just goes back to the whole, we're looking forward to seeing what we can do with Zach Rinaldo, and now they got rid of Scott Hartnell for R.J. Umberger. R.J. Umberger maybe not better than Scott Hartnell in this league. At least he's going to get less penalty minutes, I think, than Scott Hartnell will. But again, the things the times on the Flyers I talk about on the show where they could use more skilled players and guys that aren't going to get in the box, that aren't going to, try to rough up other teams, get them frustrated in the penalty box. I just, again, the beat goes on, I guess you could say, with the Flyers organization and, bringing up these, guys out of the minors, I guess, that, or whatever, bringing in this guy, relying on this guy that, is only putting your team in a worse position more often than not, where you have to, kill an unnecessary penalty. And, time and time again, that's come back to bite the Flyers in the rear end, if you will. And speaking of rear end, we have a little issue with Claude Giroux to also talk about when it comes to the Flyers, which we'll talk about a little later in the show. Now that I bring up the topic of rear ends, for those who haven't heard about it, so you want to tune into the show here. I mean, because we got Flyers talk, and we got more Nick Foles talk, amongst other things here. So 610-683-4859, or you can go to the Facebook page at facebook.com/Tyler Werner Show and give your thoughts on some of these, very questionable things happening in Flyers world and also Phillies world as well. So,
you're listening to the radio voice of Kutztown University, KUO.
Pennsylvania can help your family save for college. I'm State Senator Judy Schwank with the Pennsylvania Moment. The Pennsylvania 529 Guaranteed Savings Plan helps you keep up with college tuition inflation, and you can deduct some of your contributions from your state taxes. For more information, log on to pa529.com or call 800-440-4000. I'm State Senator Judy Schwank with the Pennsylvania Moment.
.322 right here on the Tyler Werner Show on Kutztown Radio. Again, I mean, the beat goes on with the Flyers. As I said earlier in the show, I mean, as far as bringing up these players or whatever out of the AHL, or whatever, relying on this guy, that guy, overall, I mean, the Flyers are just the mentality. It's, to me, it's not a championship winning mentality. And as far as bringing in Ron Hextall as the new general manager, which is is bound to happen at some point. I don't know how it's gonna pan out entirely. Now a little later in the show, we'll also talk about Claude Giroux. He got in a little bit of trouble last week, and it brings up another debate, which I'll get into a little later. But let me get to last week. Let me get into a little bit of the overrated and underrated NFL players, team by team. Senior NFL columnist Pete Prisco came out with this article last week, and brought in a lot of interesting discussion, particularly with Philadelphia, with Nick Foles, as he Prisco has Nick Foles as the most overrated player in the Philadelphia Eagles. I kind of talked about last week how, to some degree, I mean, maybe that 27 touchdown and 2 interception, regular season stat, maybe that overrated him a little bit in some form. I mean, however you want to look at it, I don't know. Now, apparently, Nick Foles actually declined to be interviewed actually by Pete Prisco, in conjunction with this article. Nick Foles has actually been pretty, against the idea, I guess, of speaking. He's been kind of against the idea of, buying into being an NFL star and this and that, and to some degree, I kind of admire Foles for. I guess you could, if you want to put it that way.
How's everyone doing?
Yeah, Foles hasn't bought into the idea of being a star player, I guess, or however you want to put it. But nevertheless, I mean, Prisco had Nick Foles as the overrated QB, or the overrated player, I guess you could say, for the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, I mean, there's not. I don't know who. There's not many overrated. As far as overrated goes, I don't think there's many guys on this Eagle roster besides Nick Foles that maybe you could say is overrated. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I might have Riley Cooper actually as, if you want to go in that direction, because he kind of had a bit of an aberration season, and he probably benefited a lot from Deshaun Jackson being out there, who's not going to be out there this year on the field. Even though the Eagles got a couple new young receivers, Deshaun Jackson, I think, being a guy that the other teams had to game plan for, opened things up for Riley Cooper, especially like later on, mid-season and thereafter. So, I mean, if you look at it that way, I might have Riley Cooper as the overrated player. Now, the best player in the Eagles roster is, they would say LaShawn McCoy. I think he, some people might have him as overrated on this roster, and when he basically answered the question that was given to him a little while ago that I'm the best running back in the NFL when asked, that didn't do him favors, and especially the people that believe that Adrian Peterson is, even though it depends how much of the right now aspect you look at it goes. I don't know. I mean, some would say that he is the most overrated player in the Eagles, and maybe, but in today's NFL, I mean, maybe it's the running back position that it might be a little overrated, as this league more than ever is a passing league and kind of just continues to be in that direction. A quarterback driven league, and not a single running back was taken in the first round of the NFL draft this past season. And so, I mean, to some extent, I mean, the running back position might be a little bit overrated. I mean, because, Sean McCoy's a great running back. I mean, at times he's been underutilized, I think, under the Andy Reid era. Obviously, Chip Kelly put him, more to use like we would have expected this past season. But in today's NFL, I mean, just because you have Adrian Peterson or Sean McCoy, I mean, that doesn't mean that you're a perennial NFL Super Bowl caliber team. So, I mean, I don't know, but if I had to go overrated on the Eagles roster, I would probably go Riley Cooper, just because a lot of the success he had last year, I mean, might have, was probably due to Deshaun Jackson, and I mean, he got paid pretty decent to play for the Eagles again next couple years. So I don't know, in conjunction with Jeremy Maclin getting paid and to come play again. So I don't know. In underrated, they have cornerback Brandon Boykin, who's not a starter really for the Eagles cornerbacking core, but he came up with some big interceptions last season at times, as the nickel corner. Sometimes he's a key to the defense. He doesn't have the size to be a full-time starter outside, but he is plenty good on the inside, Prisco says. Maybe Brandon Boykin. I don't know. I might go with Connor Barwin if you want to go underrated. I mean, some of the plays that he made last year, and probably continue to make. I mean, at times, I mean, he was a guy that I think kind of set the tone for the defense. And again, I mean, there are a lot of occasions last season where I think that his pass rush and his ability to occasionally disrupt passes right there at the line, I think kind of bailed out the secondary, which was very suspect last season. It's been suspect for a while now, but last season, I mean, that was the Achilles heel of the team. I mean, the secondary, and at times, I mean, Barwin along with D'Amico Ryans and whoever else in the Fletcher Cox. I mean, they bailed at times. They really bailed out the secondary, I think, and the kind of the inability for the Eagles to defend the pass. Really, I think a lot of times was due to guys like Connor Barwin. So as far as underrated goes, I would probably have them as him as the underrated player. And at times I think that pass rush too probably helps a guy like Brandon Boykin catching getting interception, a poorly thrown ball under pressure. So if you look at it that way, I think have it there. Now I want to go through here and look at the other teams in the division in the NFC East, because I don't want to go through this entire thing, and or else it'll take up the rest of the show. We got other things to talk about as well. The Washington Redskins, they have overrated safety Ryan Clark, who was just brought to the Redskins, actually. Now, the reason he has is he really had a rough go of it with the Steelers last season, but now the Redskins think he will be the answer to their back end. Yeah, I could agree with that. I mean, it's not obviously I'm not as familiar here with the Redskins roster as I would be with the Eagles roster. But I heard how they got Ryan Clark earlier in the offseason, and how he's getting up there in age as well, and the players that the Redskins even have on this defense that could actually contribute. I mean, they're getting up there in age, so I mean, I could agree with that. And underrated, they have defensive tackle Chris Baker. He's a backup, but he's an effective player in that role. Every team needs a player like Baker on the roster. That's why the Redskins made sure to resign him. He can play the nose and started at defensive end last season. And I mean, underrated. I mean, that's great, but I mean, unfortunately, for the Redskins, I think the rest of that defense still is pretty going to get disposed of, I think, pretty often this season, along with, for example, the Dallas Cowboys defense, who's only worse probably than, if you think about it. When, their overrated player for the Dallas Cowboys, Pete Prisco, has cornerback Brandon Carr. He's a top dollar free agent who didn't play like it last season. He needs to step up his game or he could be gone in 2015. Well, yeah, I mean, theoretically, I mean, anybody on the Cowboys defense could be gone in 2015, considering how historically bad this defense was last year. And they only got worse when, they lost perhaps the only good player on their defense, DeMarcus Ware, who's getting up there in age, but was still the best player on their defense. And they lost Sean Lee for the entire season for that, that old ACL tear. So, I mean, theoretically, I mean, anybody on this Dallas Cowboys defense could be gone in 2015. So, really, I mean, I don't... Overrated, I mean, to me, it's whatever. Now, the underrated is QB Tony Romo. Yes, Romo. Without him, the Cowboys stink. Well, I think this coming season, they already will stink. Wouldn't you agree with that? I mean... But I mean, anyways, I mean, and let's stop the narrative that he is bad in the fourth quarter. He was really good in that quarter last season. Maybe it's not always just the fourth quarter. Maybe it's just the one. It's not necessarily the fourth quarter. It's at times just the one play that he needs to make. Maybe that the one throw that he needs to make that he's maybe really bad in. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about underrated players on the Dallas Cowboys roster, I mean, even if people were to say, I mean, Romo's bad in the fourth quarter, I mean, you mean to tell me that, Kyle Orton for an entire season, I mean, the Cowboys would be even more of a mess than they probably will be this season. Without Romo, I guess. I mean, they got Des Bryant, and who else on this roster do they really have, though? I mean, Jason Witten's getting up there in age. He's still a decent tight end, but he's not what he once was. Really, underrated. You're a quarterback on each team is bound to either be in the underrated or overrated column, I think. Because, again, I mean, if they don't have much of a supporting cast, which, Tony Romo kind of doesn't have much of a supporting cast, I mean, I think you're bound to put the quarterback in the underrated spot there. And, yeah, I mean, as far as the Cowboys roster goes, I could agree that, to some extent, Tony Romo, when healthy, is their bright spot, even though, I mean, even though he has a reputation of choking at the worst possible time, again, I mean, maybe if they had a better, somewhat of a better defense, or maybe a better supporting cast around him, I don't know. But then again, at the end of the day, I mean, he's won one playoff game in his entire, decade-long career, and of course that was against the Eagles several years ago. So I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, the expectation, the bar is pretty low, I think, for the Cowboys organization if you look at it, and Tony Romo, I don't know. I mean, underrated, I guess, by Cowboys standards. There you go. And then, of course, last in the NFC East, the New York Giants. Both defensive players, as far as this overrated and underrated discussion goes. Overrated defensive end Matthias Kiwanuka. He had 7 sacks, but he had far too many games where he didn't do enough. He's a former first-round pick who should be putting up better numbers. If he's he's a first-round pick, and I mean, I guess he should be putting up better numbers. And he's not a big name here, really, coming out. It's screaming at me here. And the Giants, they did have a pretty bad defense, so last season, so I could see that. Underrated cornerback Prince Amakamurama. I can't even say that. Amakamurama. I think I said it right that time. I don't know. He was, note how he's in the underrated block here, because probably nobody knows who he is. But anyways, he was one of the few bright spots during a disappointing season for the Giants. Now he has to show he can do it again.
Who is this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but so there you go for the New York Giants. Nobody on that list for the Giants that really jumps out at me here as far as names go. So that's that. Again, I mean, this overrated underrated list. I mean, share your thoughts on it. I mean, it's just Google it, CBSSports.com, Pete Prisco. If there's anybody on any of these teams that jumps out at you, I mean, I scroll down here, I see overrated on the Baltimore Ravens, Ray Rice, of course having his issue earlier in the offseason, Buffalo Bills running back CJ Spiller, so I don't know. I mean, share your thoughts on that list at 610-683-4859, as well as Flyers talk that we're going through here coming up in the next segment. I will I'll get into this Claude Giroux one night jailing, I guess you could say. Very I don't know. It brings up another interesting discussion, and obviously I'll get to that. And I wanted to get into this QB list that came out last week. I believe it was about the general, I guess the general managers in the NFL. I guess they took this list of all the QBs in the NFL, and based off of how organizations think they would be ranked, I guess I don't know. I'm trying to Google that here and get that list up, and talk about it in the next segment here on the Tyler Werner Show, right here on Kutztown Radio. 610-683-4859, or go to the Facebook page at facebook.com/Tyler Werner Show. We'll be right back in just a moment.
It's Telescopic Topics, a look into the world above us.
Have you ever wondered what a storm several times more powerful than any storm on Earth would look like? My name's Courtney Gibbett. Jupiter's Great Red Spot is that storm, and it is the largest in the solar system that has been brewing for roughly 400 years. It has been recorded as being 40,000 kilometers in diameter, and although it has shrunk to about half that size, it can still engulf 3 Earths. The storm was discovered in the 1600s and has been continuously observed since the 1870s. The Voyager and Galileo spacecrafts, along with the Hubble Space Telescope, have provided the most detailed observations of the storm, including its oval shape, its changing reddish color, and its swirling properties. The Great Red Spot is a high-pressure system that rotates counterclockwise in about 6 or 7 days, with winds of 400 kilometers per hour along the perimeter of the storm. One theory for its red color is that the storm dredges up material from deep inside Jupiter. As it is not anchored to a solid surface, the storm extends above the main layer of clouds on Jupiter. The storm does not move up or down but sideways, and has traveled around the planet several times. The Great Red Spot storms might be compared to a hurricane because these storms appear when areas of rising air collide with areas of falling air. The thing is, though, that the magnitude of these storms is unlike anything that the Earth has ever experienced. Since 1998, smaller storms on Jupiter have collided and merged together to form massive storms, but these are still nothing compared to Jupiter's Great Red Spot. Scientists do not know how long the storm will last or how it will look in 100 years, but this magnificent storm will continue to be monitored closely as it is still the largest and most intense storm to ever be discovered in the solar system.
Telescopic Topics, a look into the world above us. Stay tuned to KUR for more telescopic topics, and for more information, or to hear this segment again, click on the Telescopic Topics icon on the KUR website at www.kutztown.edu/KUR. Telescopic Topics is a production of the KU Physical Sciences Department and is recorded by KU astronomy students in the studios of KUR. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
3:43 on this hot summer day here on the Tyler Werner Show, right here on Kutztown Radio, talking Philadelphia sports. Every time I hear this song, I think of the opening seconds to Die Hard with a Vengeance, Die Hard 3 with Bruce Willis, and so I don't know. Interesting song that would go along with today's hot summer day, and yeah, so. But yeah, anyhow, getting back to the sports talk here, I mentioned earlier, I hinted at this, I guess this long-awaited Flyers Claude Giroux story that I was going to talk about. Last week, last Tuesday or Wednesday, Flyers off season, some players, I guess living it up a little bit. Claude Giroux, captain, center of the Flyers in particular. Last year, last year around this time, I think actually, ironically, he was, apparently he was drunk and singing karaoke, at this club or bar or whatever, around this time last year, ironically, and July 4th, last week, I guess late last week, Claude Giroux was having a little too much to drink, apparently, over up in Canada in Ottawa, and he apparently he grabbed the rear end of a police officer at this bar multiple times. That's I mean, you got to be. Obviously, this is another embarrassing, case of Claude Giroux here.
I'm embarrassed.
Yeah, you can talk about embarrassment, like Donovan McNabb getting that DUI earlier than this year, and Claude Giroux here, repeatedly grabbing the rear end of a police officer in Ottawa. I guess he was charged with disorderly conduct, and he was jailed overnight and then let go the next day. But obviously, Ron Hextall and Claude Giroux, they kind of spoke about this last week a little bit. I mean, they I guess they said they weren't going to say anything more about it. I have I have an article up here. I guess the Claude Giroux apology that we're gonna let's go through here a little bit. He says, I have the utmost respect for law enforcement and apologize to the Ottawa Police Department, and specifically the individual officer who obviously grabbed the rear end of. General Manager Ron Hextall added to the news release that the Flyers will deal with the incident internally and won't discuss the matter publicly. The NHL said via email that unless there is more to the issue, there is no reason to discipline Giroux. It's unclear whether there will be any discipline coming from the team. And, I guess from the sounds of it or the looks of it here, I mean, they're going to deal with it internally. I don't know. It doesn't really sound like anything major is going to happen here, as far as, Claude Giroux in the team or whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, though, I mean, obviously, to put yourself, so that you don't put yourself in this position in the future, another embarrassing situation or a potentially jail sentencing situation. You're the captain of the Philadelphia Flyers here. I mean, I guess there's any lesson to be learned here, whether it's the off season or not. You don't have too much to drink, really. If I was a professional athlete, I mean, that begs the discussion here. I mean, if I were a professional athlete, I wouldn't really drink at all. I mean, actually, basically, I don't really drink at all, to be honest. I mean, all I really drink is an occasional glass of wine. So, I mean, and that's, really, I guess that's good for your heart, really, actually. It's cardiovascular benefits. But, I mean, professional athletes, I mean, if you're a professional athlete, I mean, drinking, boozing it up, whether it's the off season or not, I mean, talk about leading by example, Claude. I mean, I just don't, I don't, personally, I mean, take it seriously, I think, I don't know, but my point is, if, I'm already, I guess 99% straight edge, if you want to put it that way. If I was an athlete, that's how I would be too, I guess. Obviously, I would think that athletes are more inclined to, not do that, I guess you could say. Not go out and get drunk, really. But, here, Claude Giroux, could have almost, who knows? I mean, he could have found himself, you saw what happened to Riley Cooper last year. I mean, he could have got caught in a worse situation, a situation just as bad, or, who knows? Could have been worse than a Riley Cooper situation. You never know. I mean, the bottom line is, we said it here on this program before, especially if you're a professional athlete and you're the captain of the Philadelphia Flyers hockey team, I mean, you shouldn't be out there getting drunk, and that's the bottom line. I mean, hopefully he learns from this rather embarrassing situation, really, and just doesn't get caught with the same kind of trouble in the future. Because again, I mean, last year, I mean, he playing golf, I mean, he hurt himself, broke his wrist or whatever. I mean, I or something like that, and. Who knows? I mean, maybe that to some extent was related to possible drinking. I don't know. I mean, I don't know, but the people listening out there, I mean, would you not agree that when it comes to athletes and drinking, I mean, you just they shouldn't be out there getting drunk, whether it's the off season or not. And if I was an athlete, I mean, I already don't really drink at all, and I don't think it really should be a part of Claude Giroux's life. I guess getting drunk and whatever, but I don't know. I mean, and again, I mean, this is the Flyers organization, and last week they bring up the AHL penalty minutes leader in the and again, I mean, it's a team that, every year, I mean, maybe they'll be competitive. Maybe they'll be another, 5-6 seed in the the Eastern Conference overall. But to me, I mean, at no time in the near future do they look like they're going to be a perennial Stanley Cup contender. At least the way I look at it. So, that's where we're at. The Philadelphia Flyers right now, and Claude Giroux. I mean, I don't know. I guess not getting any discipline from the organization or the league here, by the looks of it. But nevertheless, I mean, it's time for them to get a little more serious, maybe, if you ask me. So that's that story. Now again, I mean, I mentioned earlier in the show, I wanted to start getting into the quarterbacks talk here with the NFL 2014, the upcoming season. I've said in the past, that I wanted to kind of hold off on the the whole quarterback list talk until maybe we get closer to the season. But when it all comes down to it, I mean, we other than the occasional Claude Giroux story, I guess, here, and the Phillies, Ruben Amaro speaking to the team, and only now, I guess, realizing that changes need to be made. I guess when it all comes down to it, I mean, there's just not a whole lot going on right now in the sports world, the Philadelphia sports world, and so the quarterback discussions are going to begin more, I guess, on today's show, and maybe continue throughout later. I was during the last break, I was trying to get up the specific list that I heard that was getting talked about last week, and but it turns out I got a different, by accident I got a different one up, Biathlon Sports. But I mean, it is what it is. We'll talk about this list, I guess, instead. It still has its interesting quirks to it, I guess you could say. But there was one last week that came up that was kind of composed of how the rest of the league thinks, like general managers collectively, and I don't know. I mean, they had like Ben Roethlisberger as 6 on that list, and I think he hasn't done anything really in this league in several years. And when I think the mistake that a lot of people make with these lists is that they think about too much of the legacy aspect of it, and what they've done, what they did 5+ years ago, and this and that, and they're not really. It's not as much up to date, I guess you could say, maybe, and it's based a little too much on reputation, and not right now. Like when I make a quarterback list, like if I were to make a quarterback list right here today, I would base it on July 8th, 2014, right here at 3:54 p.m. That's that's how I do my quarterback lists. And I mean, we're in the middle of the off season, so I mean, it's kind of it would kind of carry over from last season, but really, I mean, to me, that's how I base my lists on, and maybe to some extent there's projection, but to me, it's always a scale that can slide, a sliding scale. For instance, last year, I mean, I had Joe Flacco was, I think, maybe 5th on my quarterback list because of the incredible postseason run he had, and this he helped take the Ravens to the Super Bowl, and was he was 10 touchdowns, no interceptions throughout the playoffs, and the Ravens were hot, and he's playing on all cylinders, and he was playing like he was playing lights out at the quarterback position. But what happened last year? I mean, he had a down season, and to me, I mean, that's slid him out of the top 10 essentially, top 10 quarterback list, and now he's maybe he's a top 15. I don't. Now he's like middle of the pack, but just goes to show, in a lot of these quarterback lists, slid him out of the top 10, which I would agree with. But then when Ben Roethlisberger is still on these lists, and he hasn't had a good season in several years now, almost a few years. I mean, I just scratch my head and think, really, like, I don't understand these lists sometimes. A lot of double standards, I think. But let me go through this one here while we still have the time on today's show. This list is again from Athlon Sports, and again, I was trying to find this list quickly. Maybe next week I'll get this other list that I was talking about that I wanted to get to, that I intended to get up, but I couldn't find. This list has Peyton Manning on the Broncos number one, which, coming off the season he had, a lot of people would agree with that. Obviously, the record-breaking 55 touchdown season he had, maybe record-shattering, I should say. Obviously the Super Bowl, the Denver Broncos really got caught with their pants down, but nevertheless, I mean, Peyton Manning is bound to come out again and have another huge season, like last season this year, and maybe make another run for the Super Bowl. And then 2, Aaron Rodgers, 3, Tom Brady, 4, Drew Brees. This top 4 I think is pretty solid. Like none of these guys go anywhere. That's the thing. Like, they can be somewhat interchangeable. I mean, more often than not, you'll probably have Drew Brees at 4. But like Brady, Rodgers, Peyton Manning, I mean, they can be interchangeable. And they basically, the past few seasons, they have been interchangeable. The past several seasons, if you think about it. Obviously, for years, Brady and Manning have been interchangeable in this, this top echelon of quarterbacks here. Now, after 4, is where it gets a little more unpredictable, really. And, well, 5th on this list is Phillip Rivers, which, I think he's in the top 10 quarterback. I have him maybe at, like, 9th. I don't have him at 5th. I mean, you have Phillip Rivers, he had a great season last year. Not the greatest supporting cast around him. And again, I mean, to me, I keep it as a pretty up-to-date list, but I also, I look at the skill set of what these quarterbacks do, and, they have Russell Wilson at 6, which, I agree with, actually. I think that's right where I would have him. I think I have Luck at number 5 on my quarterback list, and then Russell Wilson at 6. Again, I mean, 6 is, I'm actually surprised, a lot of quarterback lists have Russell Wilson lower than 6. 7th, 8th, 9th, whatever. Maybe not even in the top 10, but, I've talked about it before in this show. I think the first show I did, I talked about his skill set and whatnot. Andrew Luck, they have at 7. I could talk about his skill set, more, and obviously potential. Obviously, Russell Wilson, Andrew Luck, young quarterbacks. Ben Roethlisberger, 8. I mean, I'll in the future episodes here on the Tyler Werner Show, probably next week, we'll talk more about these lists in detail, as we're out of time for today. But I look at 9, and they got Jay Cutler. A little erratic of a top 9. I mean, top 10 for Jay Cutler. I'm a little mind bent over that. And Stafford, number 10. I mean, now we're not talking fantasy here. We're not just talking about yards and all that. I mean, it says here completed 2013 with this many yards, 650 yards passing. I mean, again, we'll debate this on debate this on future episodes here on the Tyler Werner Show, as we're out of time today. But again, it just goes to show you how very intriguing and I guess variable these lists can be. Some people, do they base it on fantasy? They base it on past legacy. Sometimes I just don't know how. I don't know what. I don't know how these lists come together, really. When I think about it and read them, sometime, inconsistencies, maybe you could say. With all due respect, but again, I mean, we're out of time today, so I'll wrap things up for the Tyler Werner Show today. I'll do a show next week, and then after that, I'm going to have a week off. I'm going to be on vacation, so look forward to next week's show. We'll do more QB discussion, and specifically where Eagles QB Nick Foles fits in with these these top 10 and, top 32 QB lists in the NFL. So everybody have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you next week on the Tyler Werner Show.